and I'm the managing partner at Commercial Realty Specialists. And today I'd like to give you another idea to share. Today's idea to share has to do with how can one achieve flexibility in their commercial real estate lease. So what I'd like to do is just kind of go through a few of my notes right now. Many of the tenants out there, what they're asking for is lease flexibility. As an example, right to cancel, right to expand, right to contract. How can they keep the mobility and the flexibility in their office or industrial leases? Cancellation clauses actually can be very tricky because it really depends on a myriad of factors. As an example, the type of property, is it a single tenant or is it a multi-tenant building? If it's a single tenant, it's much more difficult on a landlord because obviously if a lease is canceled, that means that they're going to be having 100% vacancy. If it's a multi-tenant building, perhaps there's the opportunity of other tenants to expand into that space, or it may be a little bit easier for the landlord to release that space. Tenants credit, that's very important with regard to any cancellation provisions. What's the length of the lease term? If they have a long-term lease, 15, 20 years, that could be a challenge if the tenant wants to cancel the lease. And most importantly, really, it's the leverage. What leverage do the parties have in the negotiation? Cancellations also can really affect the financeability of the property and then ultimately the value of that property. Because fortunately or unfortunately, banks and lending institutions like to have a consistent income stream. They want to know that their income's going to be coming in on a consistent basis, and if there is the option or opportunity for a tenant to cancel its lease, they may in fact not have that consistency in their income stream. Often landlords will require some type of proof that the sales are poor for the company, and then also ask the tenant to really reimburse any of the costs associated with the cancellation, such as a decrease in the market rents, unamortized costs that the landlord had incurred with regard to tenant improvements or leasing commissions, as well as perhaps the downtime during the reletting period. Another way to create flexibility in leases is to perhaps do a shorter term lease, such as a 3 or a 5 year lease term, and then add options to extend into contract. So what we're doing is we're signing a 3 or 5 year lease, and then after that period of time, you have an option to extend. Usually the fairest way to have the option rent is at the fair market rental rate for properties in that particular area. The downside for a shorter term is usually you're going to be receiving fewer or lower amounts of rental concessions, such as free rent or tenant improvement allowance concessions. Regarding options to contract or expand, this works really well if it's in a multi-tenant building, where the flexibility is frankly rather simple. You can give back space, somebody else can release that space. It's much more challenging in a single tenant building because obviously if you can't contract much, or it's very difficult to do that, and certainly you can't expand if you're occupying the whole building. Another flexible alternative is a liberal subleasing arrangement with the landlord. If the tenant remains liable for the lease but is able to sublease parts of their space out, specific offices or portions of the warehouse or other parts of the building, without the landlord getting too involved in the transaction, well, the tenant's receiving rental income, thereby making it easier for them to pay the landlord. Bottom line, the landlord's still receiving his rent, and that's what the landlords are really looking for. There are many ways to create win-win negotiations in a transaction, and all it takes is the flexibility of the sides to talk in a reasonable and straightforward manner. That was my idea to share.